3 weeks vanished in a blur of anticipation and mounting tension. The Grand Aurora Hotel shimmered beneath a canopy of thousands of golden lights, casting a warm, decadent glow over the courtyard. Luxury sedans lined the entrance two deep, disgorging a relentless stream of celebrities, corporate titans, fashion icons, and high ranking journalists for what the media had dubbed the social event of the decade. Inside the grand ballroom, an army of event coordinators and florists scrambled from corner to corner, making sure every crystal glass and floral centerpiece was immaculate. Standing quietly near the edge of the stage, Han Ji-eun checked her digital tablet, reviewing the final lighting blueprints for the charity's main presentation. She wore a minimalist, floor length, black evening gown, her hair swept up into a sleek, elegant knot. Unlike the glittering actresses and socialites posing for flashbulbs near the entrance, she wore no diamonds or heavy jewelry. She wanted to blend into the background, finish her work, and slip away before the guest of honor ever set foot in the room. Director Han, an event staff member, called out, jogging over with a nervous smile. The security detail just radioed in. The guest of honor has arrived. Ji-eun's heart gave a violent, traitorous lurch against her ribs. She took a slow, deep breath, forcing her voice to remain steady. Thank you. Let's make sure the AV team is ready for the walkthrough. Flash, flash, flash. Outside, the hallway exploded into a wall of blinding white light as dozens of cameras fired simultaneously. The roar of the reporters calling out a single name echoed through the high ceilings. Taeyang, over here. Kim Taehyung. Smile for the camera. We love you. Stepping through the glass doors with effortless, commanding grace, Kim Taeyang entered the ballroom. He wore a tailored black double breasted suit that fit his tall frame to perfection, his silver streaked hair styled back to reveal sharp, striking features. The public persona he wore was flawless, a warm, confident media smile curving effortlessly across his lips. He raised a hand to wave at the press corps, turning to let the cameras capture his best angles. And then his wandering gaze swept across the expansive ballroom floor and froze completely. Standing only 20 feet away, illuminated by the soft amber wash of the stage lights, was Han Jeon. For 3 terrifying suspended seconds, the roaring noise of the ballroom seemed to evaporate. The flashing cameras, the bustling staff, the chatter of corporate executives, everything melted into absolute silence. Neither of them moved a single muscle. 5 years of built up resentment, unspoken grief, and phantom memories collided in that single agonizing glance. The young's practiced celebrity smile vanished instantly, replaced by a dark, intense gaze that burned straight through her. Panic fled in Ji-eun's chest. She averted her eyes, whispering to herself that she was merely the architect, nothing more, and turned sharply on her heel to walk toward the side exit. Miss Han. The deep, quiet voice cut across the room like a razor blade. Ji-eun's footsteps locked in place. She closed her eyes for a brief second, bracing herself, before slowly turning back around. Taeyang was already standing directly in front of her. He had crossed the distance with terrifying speed. Up close, the artificial warmth in his eyes was entirely gone, replaced by an arctic chill. So, Taeyang's voice was a low, dangerous murmur, meant only for her ears. You finally decided to grace Korea with your presence again. Ji-eun kept her gaze fixed firmly on the lapel of his jacket, refusing to look into his eyes. Congratulations on your success tonight. The charity event is magnificent. A sharp, humorless laugh escaped his lips. Is that really all you have to say? After vanishing into thin air for 5 years without a single word? She tightened her grip on her digital tablet, her fingernails pressing painfully into the plastic casing. I think we are both very busy people now, Mr. Kim. There's no reason to dwell on the past. Before she could step around him, Taeyang smoothly shifted his weight, blocking her path entirely. I searched for you, he whispered, his voice cracking with a raw, buried anguish. I went back to your old apartment building. I visited your university campus. I asked mutual acquaintances who used to know you. You didn't just break up with me. Ji-eun, you wiped yourself off the face of the earth. Ji-eun clenched her jaw so hard it ached. Every word he spoke felt like a physical blow, reopening the wounds she had spent half a decade stitching shut. She wanted nothing more than to drop her defenses, to throw herself into his arms, and confess every agonizing detail of the sacrifice she had made. If he learns the truth, Chairman Kwon's merciless voice echoed in her mind. Everything you've sacrificed becomes meaningless. You will destroy him. She forced her expression to harden into stone, lifting her chin to meet his burning gaze. I'm sorry, she said coldly, her voice devoid of any warmth. I had a life to build, a future to chase. I didn't owe you an explanation then, and I certainly don't owe you one now. Taeyang stared at her, as if hearing those words was equivalent to being struck across the face. The last fragile remnants of hope inside his chest shattered into fine dust. You're right, he muttered, a bitter, trembling smile touching his lips. You never did care. Without waiting for another word, he stepped aside, turning his back to her and walking away into the crowd without a single backward glance. Ji-eun stood frozen on the spot, waiting until he was completely swallowed by the sea of guests before she finally allowed herself to draw a ragged, shaking breath. A single tear slipped down her cheek, which she viciously wiped away before anyone could notice. An hour later, the gala officially commenced. Chandeliers dimmed as the spotlight shifted to the grand stage. Taeyang stepped up to the podium, delivering a poised, deeply moving speech about supporting vulnerable children and funding life saving pediatric medical treatments. The audience erupted into thunderous applause, deeply moved by his genuine passion. Ji-eun stood in the wings, watching him with a soft, heartbroken smile. Even after everything, he was still the kind, compassionate soul she had always believed he would be. As the applause died down, the master of ceremonies stepped back to the microphone with a bright, beaming smile. Ladies and gentlemen, before we open the floor for donations, we have an extraordinary announcement regarding the Hope Foundation Centerpiece project for the coming year, the new Seoul Children's Medical Center. The crowd murmured with eager interest. The Foundation's board has decided that this massive undertaking will be a direct, high profile collaboration, the host continued cheerfully. Our primary cultural ambassador will, of course, be our guest of honor, Kim Taehyung, and serving as the chief lead architect and master designer for the entire hospital complex will be none other than director Han Ji-eun. Gasps of delight echoed through the ballroom, immediately followed by an overwhelming wave of enthusiastic applause. On stage, Thieng's polite smile vanished completely, replaced by a look of sheer, unadulterated shock. In the wings, the color drained entirely from Jeon's face. Her tablet nearly slipped from her numb fingers. The host chuckled, oblivious to the emotional bomb he had just dropped. You two will be working side by side on site development for the next 6 months. Let's give our dream team a round of applause. 6 months. The words echoed like a death sentence in both their minds. Across the ballroom, Taeyang slowly turned his head, locking eyes with Ji-eun across the sea of tables. Neither of them looked excited. Neither of them looked pleased. To the hundreds of journalists and flashing cameras, it was hailed as a match made in heaven, a partnership between Korea's biggest superstar and its most brilliant young architect. But to the two people trapped in the center of it all, it felt like being buried alive together in a grave they had dug 5 years ago. And high above the ballroom floor, standing quietly on the shadowed VIP balcony overlooking the chaos, Chairman Kwon slowly lowered a pair of opera glasses, a cold, satisfied smile spreading across his aged face. So, the old man murmured softly into the empty dark, fate has brought you back under the same roof. He took a slow sip of his champagne, his eyes narrowing dangerously. Let's see how long you survive each other this time. The morning sun cast a pale golden light through the floor to ceiling glass windows of Ji-eun's architecture studio. Large architectural models, rolls of blueprints, and scale drawings of the upcoming children's hospital covered the long oak tables. Promptly at 9 o'clock, the main glass door swung open. Taeyang walked in, dressed in a sharp, casual black trench coat, his expression a wall of professional detachment. Every employee in the open plan office immediately straightened up, murmurs of quiet awe rippling through the staff. Good morning, Mr. Kim. An assistant manager greeted him nervously. Taehyung offered a polite, distant nod, but his eyes were already scanning the room. Then he saw her. Ji-eun was standing near the back wall, bent over a massive 3D topographical model of the hospital complex, quietly discussing structural load bearing points with a junior designer. She looked different from the girl he had known 5 years ago, sharper, more poised, wrapped in an aura of absolute authority. But the moment she felt his gaze and looked up, he caught that familiar, fragile shadow hiding just behind her eyes. Good morning, she said, her voice steady and entirely devoid of personal inflection. Please, come over to the main conference table. There was no warmth, no hesitation, just two elite professionals forced into an inescapable orbit. For the next 2 hours, the studio turned into a battleground of quiet blueprints and technical specifications. Jian walked them through the design concepts, her voice calm and calculated. The pediatric wards are oriented toward the south southeast, she explained, pointing a laser pointer at the architectural rendering. That ensures maximum natural sunlight for recovering children throughout the day. We've also designed an accessible rooftop sensory garden to reduce pre treatment anxiety and give families a quiet space to breathe. Taeyang sat across the table, listening in silence. He had spent 5 years convincing himself that she was cold, calculating, and driven purely by material status. Yet every single architectural line she had drawn, every safety measure, every compassionate touch built into the hospital layout was dedicated to comforting sick, terrified children. How, he thought, his chest tightening with a confusing mix of anger and sorrow, can a woman who cares so fiercely about complete strangers walk away from someone who loved her with zero remorse? Just as Ji-eun concluded her presentation, the heavy double doors of the studio clicked open. A tall, impeccably dressed man walked in with an easy, confident stride. He carried a sleek leather briefcase in one hand and a wrapped bouquet of fresh white lilies in the other. Ji-eun, a warm, smooth voice called out. You skipped breakfast again, didn't you? Several employees chuckled fondly. One of the senior designers smiled. Director Han has been glued to those hospital blueprints since dawn, Daniel. Daniel Choi walked straight up to her desk, placing the lilies gently beside her laptop with a familiar, intimate ease. I knew you wouldn't eat, so I brought coffee from that bakery you like. Ji-eun looked up, offering him a soft, genuine smile that she had completely withheld from Taehyung all morning. Thank you, Daniel. You really didn't have to. Taehyung's pen snapped in half between his fingers. Daniel. The name hit him like a physical blow. The mysterious man she had supposedly left him for 5 years ago, the wealthy, successful rival who could supposedly give her everything, Taehyung couldn't. Sensing the sudden drop in temperature in the room, Daniel turned his head, his eyes landing on Taeyang. A polite, confident smile touched his lips as he extended a hand. Ah, you must be Kim Taeyang. It's a pleasure to meet you in person. I'm Daniel Choi, Ji-eun's business partner and managing director. Taeyang slowly stood up. He looked down at Daniel's extended hand, and for a terrifying second, it looked like he might refuse it. But with a tight, dangerous jawline, he reached out and gave a brief, bone crushing shake. Kim Taeyang, he replied, his voice dripping with ice. I've heard a lot about you. Daniel didn't flinch, maintaining his easy composure. He turned his attention back to Ji-eun, lowering his voice slightly. I'll wait for you downstairs in the car. We still have that dinner meeting with the real estate investors tonight at 7. Ji-eun nodded, avoiding Taeyang's burning stare. I'll wrap things up here and be down in 10 minutes. As Daniel offered a polite nod to the room and strolled out toward the elevators, the tension in the studio spiked to a suffocating level. Taeyang slowly turned his gaze back to Jian. His eyes dropped to the vase of white lilies sitting proudly on her desk. Nice flowers, Taeyang muttered, his voice shaking with suppressed fury. Jiun kept her eyes fixed on her tablet. Thank you. So, Taeyang let out a harsh, bitter laugh that echoed off the glass walls. The man you left me for, the one with the money, the status, the future. Is it him? Jiun's face went completely pale. Her breath hitched. Taeyang, stop it! You don't even have to lie anymore, he interrupted, stepping closer, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. He buys you flowers. He manages your business. He takes you to investor dinners. He fits right into the glossy life you traded me for. Ji-eun wanted to scream the truth. She wanted to grab him by the lapels and tell him that Daniel was nothing more than a loyal friend and business partner, that there had never been another man, that her heart had remained locked in a cage of isolation for 5 agonizing years. But if she cleared up that single misunderstanding, the questions would cascade. He would ask about the surgery, he would ask about the hospital, he would find out about Chairman Kwon's threats, and the safety of his entire life would crumble into ash. So she forced her jaw to lock, swallowing the bitter bile rising in her throat, and met his furious gaze with absolute silence. Taehyung waited. He waited for her to deny it, to scoff at him, to call him crazy. When she said nothing at all, his last remaining illusion shattered into dust. I see, he whispered, a tear finally breaking free and tracking down his cheek before he angrily brushed it away. Have a nice dinner with your fiancé, Director Han. Without another word, Taeyang turned sharply on his heel and strode out of the office, the private elevator doors sliding open and slamming shut behind him with a heavy thud. Ji-eun stood frozen beside her desk, her knees finally buckling slightly as she gripped the edge of the wood to keep from falling. A single silent tear slipped down her cheek. Hours later, deep into the night, Daniel returned to the studio to drop off some revised zoning documents. He found Ji-eun sitting alone in the dark office, lit only by the pale neon glow of the city outside, staring blankly at the blueprints. Daniel sighed quietly, stepping into the room. You argued with him again today. It wasn't a question. Ji-eun didn't look up. It doesn't matter. He thinks I'm the man you left him for, Daniel said, his voice laced with heavy concern. How much longer are you going to let him hate you, Ji-eun? How much longer are you going to carry this cross alone? As long as I have to, she whispered, her voice cracking. He deserves to know the truth about why you gave up your kidney, why you are still tied to this nightmare. Daniel urged gently. No. Ji-eun shook her head fiercely, turning to look at him with tear-filled eyes. He deserves a peaceful life. He deserves to shine on those stages without looking over his shoulder. If he finds out Chairman Kwon threatened his sister's life, Taeyang will tear his own career apart trying to fight them. I won't let him ruin everything he worked for. Daniel looked at her with a profound, aching sadness. You still love him, don't you? For a long, agonizing moment, Ji-eun couldn't find her voice. Her chest heaved, and then she buried her face in her hands, letting the broken sobs she had held back all day finally tear through her. I never stopped, she wept, not for a single day. Unknown to both of them, parked quietly across the wide multi lane boulevard in the shadows of a towering concrete overpass, sat a black luxury sedan. Inside, Taehyung sat alone in the dark. He had forgotten his leather portfolio in the conference room and had driven all the way back to retrieve it. As he approached the glass doors of the building, he had stopped dead in his tracks. Through the illuminated floor to ceiling windows, he had watched Daniel gently drape a warm cashmere coat over Ji-eun's trembling shoulders, offering her a look of deep, protective affection before walking out into the night. From where Taehyung stood outside in the cold, it looked like the undeniable, tender gesture of a man caring for the woman he loved. His heart felt like it had been torn straight out of his chest. He turned away, walking back to his car in a daze, his mind replaying the phantom image of Daniel's hand on her shoulder. He didn't hear Daniel's final, parting words echoing up in the empty office. Take care of yourself. You're still taking heavy medication because of that emergency surgery. Taehyung drove away into the rainy night, fully convinced that Han Jiun had built a happy, untouchable life with another man. But as he gripped the steering wheel tight enough to crack the leather, a single terrifying question echoed persistently in the back of his mind, refusing to let him rest. What surgery was Daniel talking about? The construction site of the new children's hospital was a whirlwind of frantic progress. Dust hung thick in the crisp morning air, mixing with the sharp scent of wet concrete, freshly cut timber, and heavy machinery. Every morning at sunrise, Taeyang and Ji-eun were forced into proximity. They inspected steel frameworks, reviewed electrical schematics, and walked the perimeter together. In front of the contractors, the site engineers, and the media crews, they played their assigned roles to absolute perfection, cool, distant professional partners. But the moment the crowd drifted away, an oppressive silence settled between them. Neither of them knew how to bridge the chasm of lies, resentment, and unspoken history that lay beneath their feet. One afternoon, the project team took a scheduled field trip to an existing pediatric ward downtown to gather first hand data on patient flow and room acoustics. As soon as the young walked through the glass doors of the ward, a group of young patients recognized him. Gasps echoed down the corridor, and within seconds, a dozen children came running over, their faces lighting up with pure joy. Opa, it's really him. Can we take a picture? Taehyung immediately dropped to one knee, a warm, radiant smile transforming his features. He didn't brush them off or rush the moment. He signed every autograph book, crouched down for photos, and listened intently to every excited story the children told him. Standing near the nurse's station down the hall, Ji-eun watched him quietly. A soft, melancholic smile touched her lips. Despite the fame, the wealth, and the cold walls he had built around his heart over the past 5 years, he was still the same kind, compassionate soul who used to feed stray cats behind his dorm. He hadn't lost his heart. Just then, a little girl with a bright yellow hair clip tucked gently on the hem of Ji-eun's black blazer. Ji-eun blinked, snapping out of her thoughts, and knelt to the child's eye level. Hello there. Do you need something? The little girl tilted her head, her big eyes studying Ji-eun's face with innocent curiosity. Annie, are you okay? Ji-eun forced a reassuring smile. Of course I am, sweetie. Why do you ask? The child pointed a small finger right at Ji-eun's cheek. Then why are you crying? Ji-eun's breath hitched. She instinctively raised a hand to her face, her fingers brushing against a wet trail she hadn't even realized was falling. I just got a little dust in my eye, Ji-eun whispered, quickly wiping her cheek away. Thank you for worrying about me. Moments later, as the team gathered in the hospital's ground floor cafeteria for a brief debrief, the lingering heavy air in the room became too much for Ji-eun to bear. A sharp, familiar cramp suddenly stabbed through her abdomen, stealing the breath from her lungs. She stood up abruptly, pressing a hand tightly against her side. Excuse me, I need a moment of fresh air. I'll be right back. She hurried down the quiet, sterile hallway toward the private staff restrooms. A few seconds later, Taeyang noticed that Ji-eun had accidentally left her leather portfolio and digital tablet resting on the cafeteria chair. Sighing heavily, he picked them up. I'll take these to her before she loses them. He walked down the quiet corridor, following the direction she had gone. As he approached a private consultation alcove near the administrative wing, he heard voices drifting through a half open door. The door was labeled Times, Chief of Surgery, Restricted Access. Your blood panels and post operative scans are worse than last year, Director Han. An older, stern doctor's voice echoed through the gap. Taeyang's footsteps instantly locked in place. His body went rigid. Ji-hoon's voice answered, soft, breathless, and laced with exhausting resignation. I know, doctor. I've been managing it. Managing it? The doctor scoffed lightly, sounding deeply frustrated. You're running yourself into the ground with this massive hospital build. If you continue ignoring your physical limits, the structural integrity of your internal repair won't hold. The damage could become permanent. You need secondary corrective intervention immediately. I don't have time for surgery right now, Ji-eun replied firmly, though her voice wavered slightly. The project is at a critical phase. Your body doesn't care about your architectural schedule, Miss Han. If you collapse on site, no amount of blueprints will save you. Outside in the hallway, the blood drained entirely from Taeyang's face. Post operative scans, internal repair, surgery. The words spun violently inside his head. It wasn't a casual illness. It wasn't a minor procedure. It was something deep, chronic, and directly tied to the emergency surgery he had seen in her medical file from 5 years ago. Before he could process the full weight of what he was hearing, a senior head nurse turned the corner holding a clipboard, spotting Taeyang standing rigidly outside the restricted door. Excuse me, sir, the nurse said, her tone professional and slightly sharp. This area is restricted to medical personnel only. May I help you find something? Panic spiked in Taeyang's chest. Fearful of getting caught eavesdropping, he forced a tight knot, turned on his heel, and walked briskly away down the corridor, the heavy conversation still echoing in his ears. A minute later, the consultation door clicked open, and Ji-eun stepped out into the hallway. She looked pale, her skin practically translucent under the fluorescent lights, clutching a small bottle of prescription medication tightly in her hand. When she rounded the corner and saw Taeyang standing near the end of the hall holding her portfolio, she froze, color draining entirely from her face. Taeyang stepped forward, his eyes searching her haunted, exhausted expression. All the anger he had harbored for 5 years suddenly felt heavy, twisted, and suffocating. You left your tablet, Taeyang said, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous whisper as he handed it to her. Ji-eun forced her fingers to steady as she took it, avoiding his gaze. Thank you. Taehyung didn't move away. He blocked her path, his jaw tight. Are you sick? Ji-eun's heart slammed against her ribs. She swallowed hard, putting on her coldest corporate mask. No. I heard the doctor, Taeyang stated flatly, his dark eyes locking onto hers with terrifying intensity. I heard every word. You need a secondary corrective surgery. You've been carrying this condition for 5 years. For a split second, sheer panic flickered in Gion's eyes. Then she forced a thin, unconvincing smile. You must have misunderstood. It was just a routine checkup for exhaustion, overwork. Does overwork require post operative scans? Taehyung challenged, stepping closer until he was towering over her. Does overwork leave you taking heavy medication every single night? Ji-eun's breath hitched. She looked away, refusing to let him see the emotional dam breaking behind her eyes. My medical history is none of your concern, Mr. Kim. Please step aside. She tried to walk past him, but Taeyang reached out, his hand gently but firmly catching her wrist. The moment his skin touched hers, both of them stopped breathing. The air between them crackled with 5 years of unresolved pain, unanswered questions, and a love that refused to die no matter how hard they tried to bury it. Why won't you let me help you? Taeyang whispered, his voice cracking, the hard shell around him completely collapsing. Why are you treating yourself like you don't matter? Ji-eun stared down at his hand gripping her wrist. A single tear broke free, slipping down her cheek. Because some things, she choked out, her voice trembling violently, are worse than dying. Before Taeyang could demand an answer, she yanked her wrist free from his grip and hurried down the corridor, vanishing around the corner before he could chase after her. That evening, alone in his apartment, Taeyang couldn't sit still. The puzzle pieces were glaringly obvious now, yet they made zero sense. 5 years ago, emergency surgery, sudden breakup, cold betrayal. Present day, chronic illness, lingering medication, a high powered architect destroying her body to build a children's hospital. It wasn't a story of a woman who traded him for wealth. It was a tragedy of a woman hiding a devastating secret. With shaking hands, Taeyang pulled out his phone and dialed the only person left who might crack open the vault of the past. His younger sister, Soo Min. The phone rang 3 times before it was picked up. Opa, Somin's voice came through sleepily. Do you know what time it is? Somin, listen to me very carefully. Taeyang interrupted, his voice dead serious. I need you to tell me the truth about something. Back when you collapsed 5 years ago. Back when you needed that emergency liver transplant. The line on the other end went instantly, terrifyingly silent. The sleepy tone vanished, replaced by a heavy, suffocating stillness. Opa, what are you talking about? Sumin asked, her voice suddenly trembling. Who was your donor? Taeyang demanded, his heart hammering against his ribs like a caged animal. The hospital records were sealed. The agency told me it was an anonymous donor. But I know it wasn't. Tell me who saved your life, Sumin. Opa. Stop, please. You shouldn't. Tell me. Taeyang shouted, a tear slipping down his cheek. Before Sumin could choke out a single syllable, a loud, sharp crash echoed through her end of the line, followed by a muffled voice in the background. And then, click. The line went completely dead. Sumin, Sumin, Taehyung yelled into the phone. Nothing, just a flat electronic dial tone. Across the city, high up in a dark, glass walled executive office overlooking the twinkling lights of Gangnam, Chairman Kwon slowly lowered his desk phone. His aged, ruthless face was lit only by the cold blue glow of his computer monitor. He turned his head to look at his head of security standing quietly in the corner. He's getting too close, Chairman Kwan said coldly. He's asking about the transplant. Should we intervene, Chairman? The guard asked smoothly. Not yet, the old man smirked, swirling a glass of amber whiskey. Let him panic a little more. But make sure Han Ji-eun knows that if Kim Taeyang finds out the full truth, his precious sister will be the first one to pay the price. Dial tone buzzed flatly in Taeyang's ear, a harsh, rhythmic reminder of a conversation cut short by force. He stared at his phone screen, his heart hammering against his ribs like a caged animal. He dialed Suman's number again, directly to voicemail. He tried a third time, then a fourth. Nothing. The line was dead, switched off, or blocked. Panic, cold and sharp, flooded his veins. Someone had interrupted that call. Someone didn't want his sister breathing a single word about what happened 5 years ago. Taehyung didn't sleep for the rest of the night. As dawn broke, casting a bleak, bruised light over the Seoul skyline, he made a decision. He was done waiting for answers to fall into his lap. He drove straight to the medical center where he had overheard the doctor warning June about her health. Officially, he was there for an early morning site walkthrough of the Children's Hospital project. Unofficially, he was a man hunting for the truth. As he walked through the quiet, antiseptic smelling lobby, an elderly head nurse looked up from her desk and blinked in surprise. Mr. Kim, she murmured, offering a polite, cautious smile. Taeyang stopped, forcing his voice to remain steady. Good morning. Have we met? Not formally, the nurse said, resting her hands on her desk. But I've seen you around the pediatric wing before. Or at least, I've heard your name mentioned more times than I can count. Taehyung frowned. My name? The elderly woman nodded softly, a fond look in her eyes. There was a young woman who used to come here very often, long before this new hospital project was even a blueprint. Every single time she visited, she would sit by the recovery ward, ask about your career, and check your schedule. She celebrated every award you won, and she even cried in the hallway the night your group won its first grand prize. Taehyung's breath caught in his throat. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. What? What was her name? He asked, his voice barely a whisper. Han Ji-eun, the nurse replied simply, before Taeyang could process the crushing weight of those words, before he could ask why the woman who supposedly abandoned him for wealth was spending her lonely hours crying over his success in a hospital hallway, a doctor called out for the nurse from down the corridor. She bowed apologetically and hurried away. Taeyang stood frozen in the middle of the hallway, his mind spinning out of control. As he turned to head toward the administrative elevators, a sudden, powerful gust of wind swept through a propped open window at the end of the corridor. A stack of medical charts resting on a passing nurse's rolling trolley caught the draft, sliding off the edge and scattering across the polished floor. Instinctively, Taeyang dropped to his knees to help gather the loose papers. He scooped up a handful of charts, neatly squaring them against the floor. But as he reached for the very last page drifting near his shoe, his eyes snagged on the printed header. Patient name Han Jia. His hand froze midair. He knew he shouldn't look. He knew reading private medical records violated every boundary of ethics and decency. He started to pull his hand back. And then his eyes caught a single bolded line near the top of the clinical summary. Emergency surgery. 5 years ago. The exact week she walked out of his life. The exact week he thought she traded him for someone else. His fingers trembled as he hovered over the page, desperate to read more, to see what kind of emergency could force a healthy young art student under the knife on the exact night his entire world ended. Clack. A hand snapped over the paper, yanking it swiftly out of his grasp. Taeyang jerked his head up. The attending physician stood over him, holding the folder with a tight, nervous smile. Thank you for your help, Mr. Kim, the doctor said, his voice entirely professional, though his eyes darted anxiously around the corridor. However, these records are strictly confidential. Taeyang slowly pushed himself up from the floor. He didn't argue. He couldn't. The words were burned into the back of his eyelids like a brand. Emergency surgery. 5 years ago. It wasn't a coincidence. It was the anchor tying all the horrific lies together. That evening, unable to stay in his empty penthouse, Taehyung drove his car down to the banks of the Han River. He sat on the exact same wooden bench where Ji-eun had shattered his heart half a decade ago. The street lights flickered against the dark, churning water, casting long, lonely shadows across the concrete. For the first time in 5 years, the narrative she had fed him times I met someone else. I got tired of waiting. You weren't enough times, dissolved completely. Those words weren't the cruel truth of a selfish woman, they were a performance. A script written in blood and tears, forced out of her mouth by someone pulling invisible strings. What really happened to you that night, Jeon? He murmured to the cold, empty air, miles away. Across the sprawling city of Seoul, Jeon sat alone at her office desk in total darkness. A sharp, violent cramp radiated across her abdomen, stealing the breath from her lungs. With shaking hands, she reached into her handbag, pulled out a small prescription bottle, and dry swallowed her medication, leaning her head back against her chair as she fought off a wave of dizziness. The office door clicked open, and Daniel stepped inside, looking exhausted. You missed your physical therapy appointment again today, Daniel said quietly, leaning against the door frame. Ji-eun offered a pale, weak smile. I had a site inspection. The foundation work can't wait. Your body can, Daniel sighed, stepping closer. The doctor called me. He said if you don't slow down immediately, the internal scarring is going to require another surgical intervention. You're destroying yourself for a man who. Don't, Jion interrupted softly, her voice breaking. She looked toward the dark window, watching the distant city lights shimmer through the glass. I'm not afraid of getting sick, Daniel. She placed a trembling hand over the hidden scar beneath her clothes. I'm just terrified that Taeyang is going to find out why. At that exact second, her phone vibrated violently against the wooden desk. The screen lit up with a single terrifying word. Unknown number. Her blood ran cold. With leaden fingers, she slid her thumb across the screen and brought the phone to her ear. Chairman Kwon's cold, razor sharp voice sliced through the speaker. Han Ji-eun. She couldn't speak. Her throat closed up. It seems Kim Taehyung has been asking very dangerous questions. The chairman continued, his tone devoid of any human warmth. He is digging into hospital records. He is trying to unearth the past. I I didn't tell him anything. Ji-eun choked out, tears spilling over her eyelashes. It doesn't matter what you told him, Chairman Kwon hissed. If you don't resign from the children's hospital project by tomorrow morning, if you don't pack your bags and disappear from Seoul once and for all, I'll make sure he learns the full, ugly truth in the worst possible way. The line clicked dead. Jeon slowly lowered the phone, her hands trembling so violently she dropped it onto the desk. A single silent tear carved its way down her pale cheek. No, she whispered into the empty, dark office, her voice cracking with absolute despair. I won't let you hurt him. She had already sacrificed the man she loved once to save his sister. Now, standing on the edge of a precipice, she realized she was going to have to do it all over again, and this time there might be nothing left of either of them to save.